Western allies are slapping Russia with fresh sanctions a day after President Vladimir Putin announced his nation would recognize the independence of two regions within Ukraine. The move is viewed by many to be a pretext for the long-awaited invasion of Ukraine by thousands of Russian troops currently stationed at the border. We're getting the latest from the region and the Biden administration's response to it in tonight's Hold the Line.
Regard to being weaker. The fact is that I've gone head to head with Putin and made it clear to him we're not going to take any of his stuff.
Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Apparently Putin didn't get that message from Biden because he has gone in, sent in thousands of troops into Ukraine already, into these two so-called breakaway regions, these so-called separatist regions. There's Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, part of what is known as the Donbas region. And this is now the area that Vladimir Putin has proclaimed as part, effectively, of Russia. He's saying they're just independent, but he sent in Russian troops to create a de facto reality on the ground that this will now be a part of the Russian Federation for all intents and purposes. Biden, meanwhile, is under a lot of pressure to do something on the diplomatic front to try to stop this from turning into full-scale war. What's happened right now, in the grand scheme of things from a national security perspective, is pretty minor from the U.S. side of things. We don't have troops in harm's way. We're not engaged in active combat. But this could get a whole lot worse unless this is stopped now. Biden is stepping into things to say that he will impose sanctions already, and there'll be more if Russia continues with this aggression. Watch.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, as he indicated and asked permission to be able to do from his Duma. So let's begin to, I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? This is a flagrant violation of international law and demands a firm response from the international community.
What is that response going to be? A firm response, President Biden says. Now, keep in mind that when Donald Trump was president, we heard a lot about Russia and how Trump was Russia's puppet and Putin was calling all the shots. It was all lies. But unfortunately, it convinced a lot of Democrats, one, that that was true, but also, number two here, that if Democrats were calling the shots, then Russia would really be on notice. Apparently, Russia's on notice to take a big chunk of Ukraine and maybe try to wage war to take control of the entire country. Here is Joe Biden right now trying to tell everybody, don't worry, we're on this. There'll be sanctions. Well, let's take a look at these sanctions against Russia. Here's what he says about it. Watch.
We're implementing full blocking sanctions on two large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank. We're implementing comprehensive sanctions on Russia's sovereign debt. That means we've cut off Russia's government from Western financing. It can no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward.
Okay, is that going to stop this? Now, those are the kinds of actions you would expect perhaps on the diplomatic front. But in the background of all this is a sense that Putin has weighed the opponents he has here in leadership in Europe and certainly here in America too, in the White House. He has weighed them and decided they are wanting for courage, for vision, for strength to prevent this kind of thing from happening. Now, understand, this is, of course, Ukraine's fight, and the U.S. should not be committing troops. Hopefully, Biden will not be dragged into this. But this is a moment when it seems diplomacy and certainly the leaders who are pushing it are not up to the task. Here is NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying, this was just earlier today, every indication is out there that Russia is continuing to plan a full-scale attack. Watch.
Every indication is that Russia continues to plan for a full-scale attack on Ukraine. We see the ongoing military build-up. They promised to step back, but they had continued to step up. We see that more and more of the forces are moving out of the camps and are in combat formations and ready to strike. And we see the ongoing provocations in Donbass and the different false flag operations where they try to create a pretext for an attack. And then, of course, we saw last night that further Russian troops moved into Donbass, into parts of Donetsk and Luhansk.
So we're looking at the possibility here of an imminent, massive escalation in what has already been done. The White House is calling this an invasion, but it could quickly turn into a blitzkrieg. So Russia may be engaging here in the largest military operation that anyone's seen inside of Europe, largest attack anyone's seen inside of Europe, certainly since the era of the Clinton administration, what happened in the Balkans. It's a reminder that Russia is still a major player in the region and one who can throw its weight around on the energy front as well as on the military front. Also, remember back when Obama and Romney had that discussion in 2012 about whether Russia was a threat or not? And people in the media clapped for Obama because he was being so clever. Here's 2012. Watch.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, the Cold War's been over for 20 years.
Ha, ha, ha. Obama's so brilliant, such an amazing statesman, understands foreign policy so well, the smartest president, the smartest person to have ever been in the United States government. Got that one pretty wrong, didn't he? But it doesn't matter to any of the libs because they were able to have a laugh line at the time, and they, of course, were reveling in their ignorance of the realities of our major challenges on the world stage. Of course, when Donald Trump was president, all of a sudden Russia was a huge threat. But then they said, don't worry, Joe Biden will tame the Russian bear. Not so much. We are on the precipice of what could be a major war in Europe. So what are they going to do? Because this is yet another crisis the Biden regime simply can't afford. They can't handle this from a polling perspective. They also can't handle it from the perspective of whether they are capable, whether this regime of the Biden White House can actually make good decisions and do what's in the best interest of the American people. So what's the plan going to be? Well, I'm sure they'll have some people out there who will say, oh, the fault here is really with the Trump administration. Here's a writer at The Atlantic, a Russia collusion loon, by the way, saying just that. Ann Applebaum, watch.
I think it's also important to remember, going back to something that we talked about earlier, that Putin, has made various efforts to undo Western military support for Ukraine, including during the Trump administration. If you remember this, the argument over Trump's first impeachment was about Trump refusing to give military aid to Ukraine because he imagined he could get some dirt on Joe Biden from the Ukrainians. So why didn't Putin do this during the Trump administration? Because he thought Trump was weakening Ukraine, especially on these grounds. So the problem of Ukraine being unfortified goes back several years, and much of the fault lies in the Trump administration.
Much of the fault lies in the Trump. I mean, just, tell the audience at CNN, MSNBC, whatever, what they want to hear, no matter how stupid it sounds. And then there's this guy who Trump hired, shouldn't have, John Bolton, saying, oh, yeah, it was that we were waiting here, or rather Putin was waiting for a second Trump term to invade. So it's also Trump's fault. Watch. Crazy.
Just to go back to the Trump years, because you had difficulties there. Well, why not? Well, why not is because that's when Ukraine became so politicized as part of an impeachment.
That's exactly right.
And as part of decisions and conversations. There was one call in particular, the so-called perfect call that Trump had with, Zelensky, which, certainly telegraphed to the Kremlin they could do what they wanted with Ukraine, that America would not stand up.
Well, I think Putin was undoubtedly waiting for a second Trump term, but he's getting effectively almost what he would have expected then. This is going to be a victory for Russia.
Waiting for a second Trump term. Sure, sure. Tell that audience whatever they want to hear. Try to sell some books. Coming up, we'll talk to the First TV's Rob Smith about this and more. First, let's talk about protecting the most important asset you own, your home. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime your homeowner's policy doesn't cover. It's called home title fraud. The FBI calls home title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes that it can ruin you financially, which is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans against your home and leaves you with the payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title. The instant they detect anyone, from a cyber thief to a renter to a relative trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim. Enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Rob Smith joins us when we come back. Vice President Kamala Harris once gave a simple excuse for not visiting the U.S. southern border, saying, quote, "I haven't been to Europe either." Well, now she's there on official White House business, thousands of miles away from Biden's border crisis here in America, to bring peace and security to the borders of Ukraine. But instead, she's embarrassing the United States on the world stage. Just watch.
As the president talked about in his speech, we are aware that, again, when America stands for her principles, and all of the things that we hold dear, it requires sometimes for us to put ourselves out there in a way that maybe we will incur some cost. And in this situation, that may relate to energy costs, for example. But we are taking very specific and appropriate, I believe, steps to mitigate what that cost might be if it happens.
Kamala Harris couldn't solve our border crisis, but Joe Biden sent her to Europe to solve the Russia-Ukraine border crisis. Yeah, that's how it works, apparently. Here with reaction is the founder and president of the Douglas Society, the host of Rob Smith is Problematic, contributor here at the First TV, and United States Army veteran, Rob Smith. Rob, good to see you.
What's going on, Buck?
Kamala? I don't think anyone thinks Kamala is going to do much of anything over in Europe. What do you see happening here?
I see her further embarrassing the United States. Look, Kamala Harris is the example of what happens when you get advanced based on intangibles, and then you have a complete lack of talent, and you add to that an insane ambition. Like, this is what happens. So Kamala Harris, she's given us this word soup. She has no idea what to do with our border, but yet she is whisked over to Ukraine to talk about this situation. The whole thing is just a big old mess. And I don't know whose idea it was to go do what pretty much amounts to a photo op. I somehow get the sense that this was not really Joe Biden's idea. I think that was maybe her team's idea, because they seem more interested in getting her to sort of burnish her foreign policy bona fides than into actually answer any questions or give any real solutions as to what entirely should be going on in the situation. I mean, Kamala Harris is at this point, I do not like to be embarrassed by the vice president of America. I do love this country. I do always want it to succeed. I hope that we can make it through this moment, but she is an embarrassment, and it gives me no pleasure at all to say this, but it happens over and over and over again to somebody that is woefully unprepared for this role, and we see it every single time she steps on the stage.
It does seem like she lacks a certain knowledge base for the job, particularly when we're talking about matters of war and peace and history. Here she is, Rob, claiming that there has been peace in Europe for 70 years.
I mean, listen, guys, we're talking about the potential for war in Europe. I mean, let's really take a moment to understand the significance of what we're talking about. It's been over 70 years. And through those 70 years, as I mentioned yesterday, there has been peace and security. We are talking about the real possibility of war in Europe.
Oh, yeah, about that. Here's just some of the armed conflicts, some of the wars that have occurred in Europe over the last 7 years. The Yugoslav wars, 1991 to 2001, the first Chechen War, 1994 to 1996, the Bosnian War, second Chechen War, Russo-Georgian War of 2008, Russo-Ukrainian War, which started in 2014 and goes to present. I mean, I get it. Like, she could say that this would be perhaps on a much broader scale than those other conflicts, but Europe has not been at peace for 70 years, and Kamala Harris is certainly not going to keep it that way either way.
Yeah, no, she's not. And this is just another example. What it really does is it speaks to her kind of ignorance about world history as she is on the world stage representing the United States of America. And it really makes me think of a lot of these articles that were coming out over the past 6 to 8 months where they were really talking about what was going on inside the Kamala Harris White House, where you had the aides that spoke on condition of anonymity, of course, where they said that she doesn't really pay attention during briefings. She's not very interested in learning what it is that she doesn't know, that she is more interested in the politics of whatever given situation is, rather than actually solving a problem. And this stuff comes more and more to light every time you see her on the world stage. Like I said, an embarrassing lack of knowledge of history, an embarrassing lack of sort of composure on the world stage, and just a shocking amount of ignorance as to what she should know before she even steps on the ground in Ukraine.
I mean, here is the vice president saying, for example, the threat of sanctions will absolutely deter Putin from making the decision to invade. Watch this one.
But if Putin has made up his mind, do you feel that this threat that has been looming is really going to deter him?
Absolutely. We strongly believe. And remember also that the sanctions are a product not only of our perspective as the United States, but a shared perspective among our allies. And the allied relationship is such that we have agreed that the deterrence effect of these sanctions is still a meaningful one, especially because, remember also, we still sincerely hope that there is a diplomatic path out of this moment.
I mean, Rob, every time she speaks, it feels to me, this is the vice president of the United States. This is someone who's been sent as an emissary to try to prevent a war from breaking out in whatever form she can. It feels like I'm getting a lecture from the HR department that everyone's falling asleep during and doesn't really understand what's being said anyway.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? I don't think that you can overestimate how fundamentally weak America seems at this moment. And I hate to harp on the mask thing, but just the fact that both she and President Biden are still doing this mask thing. Is there any reason why the vaccinated and boosted vice president of the United States still needs to be walking around with the mask on when she is dealing with matters of potential war and our adversaries and things like that? I mean, it's just so fundamentally weak. It just makes me feel really sad that this is the image that we're portraying to the world stage. And now, no matter what the left said about Donald Trump, remember they said, oh, he was gonna, launch the next nuclear war. Oh, everybody in the world is laughing at us. There was nobody that was laughing at President Donald Trump. They were actually afraid of President Donald Trump. And I do not believe that there is any adversary to the United States in this world that is afraid of bumbling Joe Biden and word salad Kamala Harris wearing her mask. It's ridiculous.
Rob, always appreciate the perspective. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Buck.
The New York Times reporting the Centers for Disease Control has been withholding data from the public for fear that it might be, quote, misinterpreted. So much for transparency from our health bureaucrats. I'll take a closer look at that story in tonight's Buck Brief. First, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise that your privacy is guaranteed, but we know that's not true. That's why you need a new cybersecurity application tool called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure is using proprietary encryption and is offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communications based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue now. Without real security, people can read your emails, messages, even your bank information. Secure will never mine your data and never ask for your phone number. You can send emails to your doctor, banker, lawyer, or anyone else with total confidence that you're not being spied on by your internet provider or big tech. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. It costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com and use promo code BUCK for 25% off. We'll be right back with more on The Line. The New York Times is reporting the Centers for Disease Control has been withholding COVID-19 data from the public eye. According to the report, the CDC failed to tell people about data relevant to the effectiveness of boosters on those between the ages of 18 and 49. By the way, those are the people who are least likely to benefit from the shot, right? Other than those even younger. CDC is also being criticized for failing to publish information they collected about child hospitalization rates and comorbidities. So what could they possibly be hiding? I'll give you my reaction to all this in tonight's Buck Brief. They say, listen to the science. And if you disagree with them, they tell you to shut up, and they'll send police after you, and they'll get you fired from your job, and they'll use government force to take you down. But are they even really listening to science themselves? Well, of course not. They've been full of crap. They've been full of crap the whole time. That's not a surprise to any of you watching this, listening to me right now. But this is particularly egregious. New York Times, not some right-wing, anti-vax person or whatever. The New York Times has reported the CDC has been routinely collecting information since the COVID vaccines were first rolled out last year, according to federal officials, and withheld it from the public. The agency has been reluctant to make certain figures public, according to an official with the CDC, because they might be misinterpreting the vaccines as ineffective as a result of the data. That's right, folks. This is them saying, we can't tell you what's going on because you might not believe our vaccines are so awesome. Also, in the New York Times article, the performance of vaccines and boosters, particularly in younger adults, is among the most glaring omissions in data the CDC has made public. And then it says the CDC has also, it has also been difficult to find CDC data on the proportion of children hospitalized for COVID who have other medical conditions. This is according to the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Infectious Disease. They said the Academy staff asked their partners at CDC for that information on a call in December, and they couldn't get it. This is according to a spokeswoman for the AAP, and they were told that it wasn't available at the time. Okay, folks, let's just look at this right now for a second here. When you're talking about vaccine booster efficacy, you're talking about children being hospitalized for COVID and what comorbidities they had, or what essentially other conditions they had at the time that might have led to the hospitalization. Why don't we just know what actually happened? Why aren't we being told what the real data is? Let's understand what's happening here. The CDC is withholding information from the public. This is a publicly funded, this is a federal government agency that thinks that the people of America, whom are supposed to be able to look at these numbers and come to conclusions about what's actually going on here, and then vote to have actual accountability for the elected representatives who are either going along with this or not. CDC is saying we're actually hacking the system in essence. We're not going to give people the data they need to figure out whether or not what we're doing makes any sense. Now, this has led a lot of people, understandably, and I'm certainly one of them and have been for a long time, to think the CDC is a politicized bureaucratic monstrosity. Here's Fauci saying that the CDC is not irrelevant. Of course, he stands behind the health bureaucrats. Watch.
Has the CDC lost some of its relevancy?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. The CDC is very relevant, John. They look at the scientific data, they analyze the data, and they make recommendations. It has always been the case that at the local level, the local health authorities working with their administrative leaders, be they governors or mayors or leaders at the local level, will make their decision. They could utilize or not. I think it's the wrong thing to say that the CDC is irrelevant.
The wrong thing to say. Of course he says that. Fauci's an evil bureaucrat who has made everything in this country worse during COVID and pretended like he's the savior while he did it. Now, he's not the only one. There's others out there who are still pushing the absolutism approach to COVID. Here's CNN's Dr. Rayner saying it's safe to assume that we're not done. There's going to be more shots in your future. Watch.
So the CDC and FDA are going to have to balance the benefit to an additional fourth dose, which we do think is safe, with the necessity to do that, given the fact that cases are dropping so quickly in the United States. I think it's very reasonable to assume that at some point, everyone is going to be redosed with another dose of this vaccine. And whether that comes late in the spring or early summer or the beginning of the fall, I think it's safe to assume that we're not done vaccinating for this virus.
We're not done vaccinating. This is vaccines forever, folks. Some of us warned about this in the very beginning. Once you make mandatory vaccines, especially for a rapidly mutating virus that has animal reservoirs as well as human reservoirs for those mutations, and that is now endemic, meaning it's not going anywhere. Some of us were saying this is going to lead to the endless vaccination and health policy state that we currently see ourselves in. And of course, instead of looking at the massive failures of this campaign up to this point to stop the spread, you have people who are blaming misinformation. Here's Bill Gates. Yeah, the guy's rich because of computers from in the 90s, basically, right? Microsoft. Here he is saying that misinformation enhanced vaccinate. What does this guy know about health policy? Well, he's saying misinformation is the problem. Watch.
Well, I think the mainstream media did a reasonably good job. The scale of the misinformation, once you move past the mainstream media, is so wild you almost have to laugh about it. There's no doubt that the misinformation enhanced vaccine hesitancy, and that maps to hundreds of thousands of deaths. As we look back over the pandemic, having the politicians speak out, that doesn't work very well because then you have a lack of trust.
A lack of trust. Gee, I wonder if that could be made worse by, I don't know, the biggest federal health agency withholding data from people so they can't actually know what's true and what's not about the boosters of efficacy in those who are already at low risk from COVID. My friends, other countries are wising up to this, and the politics have shifted. So now the policies are shifting as well along with it. There are places that are just deciding now and have in recent weeks to stop pretending like if we just double mask and act like lunatics, we're going to beat this virus. It didn't work. It won't work. It was never going to work. Here is the British Prime Minister, for example, Boris Johnson, saying that all COVID-19 restrictions are done in Great Britain. Watch.
But because of the efforts we've made as a country over the past 2 years, we can now deal with it in a very different way, moving from government restrictions to personal responsibility. So we protect ourselves without losing our liberties and maintaining our contingent capabilities so we can respond rapidly to any new variant.
That part of it's a little bit of a problem, though. Respond rapidly to a new variant, how and with what? Now, some of the places like the UK that are removing these restrictions, they need to actually go further than that. Understand the restrictions didn't work, friends. This stuff failed. They failed. They made you do things. They made you get shots. They made you take masks or wear masks. Made you do things that didn't end up working the way they told you that they promised you they would. And so there has to be a reckoning now. There has to be a realization of just what has occurred here and what the reality is around all of it. And we'll continue to follow this here on Hold the Line. The Canadian government has voted to extend emergency powers after blockades and protests have actually been cleared out by the cops. So what's the end game here? Where's the outrage from the brutalization of peaceful protesters? Oh, of course, because the left likes this stuff. Co-founder of the Federalist, Sean Davis, is going to join us to make sense of it all. Stay with us.
Stop it! What? Oh my God! Oh my God! They just trampled this lady. They just trampled that lady. They just fully trampled that lady.
After disturbing videos emerged this weekend showing Canadian police beating and trampling citizens of that country, lawmakers voted last night in Canada to extend emergency powers over the weeks-long trucker protest. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying they're still needed even after police put an end to the border blockades and the occupation in the capital of Ottawa. Here he is, watch.
In a democracy, you can protest, you can share your opinion at the top of your lungs, but you can't harass your fellow citizens who disagree with you. You can't hold a city hostage. You can't block a critical trade corridor and deprive people of their jobs.
Joining me now with reaction, co-founder of the Federalist, Sean Davis. Sean, good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me, Buck.
It's amazing, isn't it, that the police, if they crack down on opponents of the apparatus, whether it's in this country or in Canada, they don't come in for a lot of criticism. In fact, a lot of Democrats out there, according to recent polling, overwhelmingly approve of Trudeau's crackdown. Not Democrats in this country. 65% approve of the use of force and violence here to end this trucker protest. Only 70% disapprove. For Republicans, 87% disapprove. The Democrats actually like jackbooted thugs and the use of state force, just only against their opponents.
That's true. Unfortunately, totalitarianism, at least on this continent, is now exclusively the ideology of the Democrat Party. We've seen it in our own country. We saw what they tried to do with vaccine mandates here. We saw how they treated people protesting at the Capitol versus how they treated violent BLM protesters who are burning down cities and courthouses and police stations around the country. The Democrat Party in this country is a totalitarian party. It believes that it has the authority and the power to tell you what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and that if you don't obey, that's tough luck for you. It's a really, really disturbing development in a place where, quite honestly, I don't think we ever thought we'd see something like that happen.
I'm going to tell you, it does feel to me like we at least have some vision of what the future would be if, let's say, Democrats could have their way in this country, where we know they want to shut down dissenting voices, they want to use social media and the force of the state whenever possible to crush those who don't agree, don't go along with particularly the mandates and the madness of Fauciism during COVID. Here is Tamara Lick, who was at the protest, a major organizer of the Freedom Convoy. She was arrested and denied bail, and they're now threatening her with 10 years in prison. I mean, it feels like they are getting away, Sean, with treating these protesters like some Al-Qaeda group or something. It seems like madness.
Well, a friend of mine, David Reboy, a brilliant analyst, has said that at least in this country and potentially in Canada, the left and the Democrats, they don't have any foreign enemies. All their enemies are domestic. And Justin Trudeau is really proving that in Canada. Look at how he treats his own citizens who are, by all accounts, peacefully protesting, versus how he treated Al-Qaeda, how he treated literal terrorists who murdered his own citizens. He paid them off. So yeah, we've crossed a bridge, we've crossed a Rubicon here of how dissent is tolerated. And what we found is whenever there is somebody on the right who's in charge, dissent is patriotic. But the second the left takes back power, dissent immediately becomes treason overnight.
We've got a Liberal member of the Canadian Parliament who stated in front of the congregation that honk honk translates to Heil Hitler, referencing the honk honk memes that have been surfacing on social media alongside the Canadian trucker protests. Check this out. Watch this.
How many guns need to be seized? How much vitriol do we have to see of honk honk, which is an acronym for Hail Hitler, do we need to see by these protesters on social media?
It's stunning. I mean, they have been lying about these protesters, Sean, the whole time, and saying things that no person, I have numerous friends who've been there reporting on what this protest, which now has largely been crushed by the force of the state, but what the protesters were all about. They were handing out sandwiches to people, playing music and ice hockey in the streets. There weren't Nazis, they weren't white supremacists, but I feel like it's a huge tell when the left in government has the need to just constantly lie about their opponents, as they did with the truckers.
Yeah, I think we've entered the age now where there is no truth, there's only power. And that if you have power, you can make anything that you want into the truth. It's a really chilling thing to see. It reminds me of what some pranksters in the U.S. did, either on 4chan, I think it was. They decided to try and punk the left and say that the OK hand signal was actually racist, just to see how many people would be stupid enough to take the bait. And wouldn't you know it, over several years, that has become dogma. It's become an article of faith among the left. And to see it happen overnight with honk honk, I mean, our happy hours, are those also homages to Hitler? I mean, they've got the same initials to them. But the problem here is these people, when they grab power, they don't care about reality. They don't care about truth. They only care about exercising power and punishing their enemies.
It was remarkable as well to see the reporting today in the Daily Mail, Sean, that there were apparently police officers in Ottawa who were celebrating the videos of the trampling of protesters under horsefoot, and even a woman on an elderly woman on a rascal scooter was part of the group that were trampled. And police officers in Ottawa were cheering this on. It does make you wonder. I mean, what does it take for folks to see that they are the thugs of tyranny? I mean, when you're doing the Trudeau crackdown and you're laughing at old ladies being trampled under horse hooves, as did happen, I think it's clear you're the bad guy.
Oh yeah, they're definitely the baddies here. If you're out there crushing skulls of people who aren't doing anything but singing songs, you're the bad guy. If you're out there threatening to take people's dogs, you're the bad guy. If you're throwing women in prison indefinitely for the crime of organizing protests, you're a bad guy. I mean, these people are clearly the bad guys. And what's so disorienting and so frustrating is we can all see in front of us the lies. We know they're lies, and yet it's almost as if we're powerless to stop them.
Sean Davis of The Federalist. Sean, good to see you, my friend, as always. Stay strong in the fight.
Thank you, Buck.
An Associated Press correspondent reports on Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 6 different languages. Well, it is actually pretty impressive. We'll bring you that coming up in Quick Hits. Surveillance video shows a group of teens brazenly robbing an entire boutique in Atlanta, but don't worry, they were all masked. And CNBC's Jim Cramer says he loved Putin's speech before quickly realizing it probably wasn't the best thing to say right about now. It is time for Quick Hits on those stories we want to get to, didn't have time to get to, but going to get to now. Let's start with kind of a fun one. Start with a little bit of the lighter fare. Usually we do that at the end, but we want to keep you on your toes, those of you watching. So we have some folks out there who would be considered a polyglot, a speaker of many languages. Now, me, I probably speak enough French to order a baguette from a boulangerie, and after that, maybe get some in Arabic, order some chicken kebab or something. But my language skills are pretty limited beyond English. Not this guy. Associated Press reporter Philip Crowther was reporting on the situation in Ukraine, did this on video in 6 different languages: English, Luxembourgish, who knew, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and German. Watch.
There's been a war with Russian-backed forces in the east, the Donbass region, for 8 years now. But despite that, the capital city of Kiev is relatively calm.
Tut sich an einen gewissen Sinn und der Krieg gewinnt, den natürlich schon am Gang ist, am Osten, an der Donbass-Region, zwischen der Ukraine, an der russischen Separatisten.
Dos reuniones que va a mantener el presidente francés hoy en Moscú con el presidente ruso Vladimir Putin y mañana aquí en Kiev con el presidente ucraniano Volodymyr Zelensky.
Moscou brandiu o anúncio de retirada da terça-feira como prova de que os temores da guerra foram fabricados por Ocidente hostil liderado pelos Estados Unidos. À ce stade, la guerre semble probable, c'est aussi simple que cela. Mais il y a encore cette petite lueur d'espoir que la diplomatie puisse arrêter une invasion russe de l'Ukraine.
Das ist genau das, was sie erwartet hatten. Desinformation, gefälschte Angriffe und ein Vorwand für Russland, in die Ukraine einzumarschieren. Aber alles ist sehr schwer natürlich vor Ort zu überprüfen.
I mean, that's pretty good, I gotta say. The guy's got some skills. Probably helpful picking up ladies in a whole bunch of different countries all around Europe. So he's got that going for him, which is nice. Now something that's not nice. A group of thieves in Atlanta empty out, there's video of this, an entire boutique clothing store. They just ripped the whole place off. I mean, they're just stealing stuff. You see, brazen, almost like, I'm just going to say this, almost like you get the sense that they're not worried about being caught, being punished, being prosecuted. I don't know, maybe they've heard from some of the progressive prosecutors in their area that, it's not a big deal to steal. As AOC says, people are just stealing baby formula because they don't have enough. Well, doesn't really seem to be the case. Turns out law and order is something that when you let it just deteriorate, it affects all of us. And it's time for the Democrats to pay a real political price for this. And then there's this. This is both evil and sad. A woman throws an abortion shower and tweeted about it. Abortions Abortion havers deserve to celebrate. Join me in celebrating my 2 abortions next weekend. My friend is throwing me an abortion shower. That's just sad and evil and troubling. I don't even know who this person is, but she needs help and prayer for sure. Anyway, CNBC's Jim Cramer. He's a guy who, well, he goes on the TV and says to buy the stock or the stock market's going to do that or whatever. You know, he's an entertainer. I don't know how good of an analyst he is. Didn't really catch the housing meltdown, that's for sure. But here's what he said about, this is amazing, about Putin's speech. Watch.
Did you guys read Putin's speech? Well, I shouldn't say it. It was fiery. I just think that what he said basically is, look, let's get the old Soviet Union back again. It's like get the band back, you know.
You know,
Except for, of course, he's a fascist.
I think, Carl, that's where.
Yeah. Look, he caught himself, to be fair, and I do live radio for hours and hours a day, and I do TV, and I'm doing things live to tape. You know, you could say something. I mean, I think, to be fair, he was trying to just say it was an interesting speech, but, you know, he did say I love it, which is probably not the move to go with right now. He corrected himself, though, so not a big deal. But, yeah, he's a guy out there with some thoughts. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.